Trump is moving at breakneck speed, making ridiculous, drastic changes, not just in America, but all over the world in terms of his challenges to globalism. And contrast that with how slowly, over many, many decades, the United Kingdom and other Western nations have been moving towards greater centralization of power and greater authoritarianism. We're going to be talking about those two contrasting systems and how they're rolling out in one particular country.
Thank you again. Please like, comment, subscribe, and give us a thumbs up. And you'll find all the links for the guests in the description below.
I mentioned Trump is moving at breakneck speed. Why is he doing that? And what's that a counterfoil to?
Okay, so it's a counterfoil to gradualism. And what is gradualism? Well, it's actually a policy in terms of politics, Fabian gradualism. Okay, so that's the slowly approach to socialism. Okay, so gradualism, taking this to Africa and the history of Africa, we have back in the early 1970s, late 60s, early 70s, we have an incredible leadership across the country. Okay, I've called them the founding fathers of Pan-Africanism. These were monumental examples of leadership. You got such men as Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Modibo Keita, Sekou Touré, Ben Bella, Algeria, then a later wave, including Thomas Sankara in the mid-80s. So what these people did, okay, so you've got Nkrumah and Nasser, joined by Modibo Keita and Sekou Touré, Modibo Keita of Mali and Sekou Touré of Guinea. They formed, and this was the two key people of this were Nasser and Nkrumah. Okay, so they formed what became known as the Casablanca Bloc. Now, the whole purpose of the Casablanca Bloc was to drive rapid industrial development of their countries. So they wanted, as soon as possible, and they actually did it. Nasser built the Aswan Dam, the second part of it, to provide irrigation to modernize Egyptian agriculture. Same happened in Ghana with Nkrumah, with the Volta Dam. He wanted the smelter to smelt to beneficiation of the aluminium, of the bauxite into aluminium. Anyway, so they were all for doing things very, very quickly. They had excellent relations with JFK. A very interesting subject, perhaps for another time. The early leadership of Africa was pushed east. They wanted to go west. They were all for the American system of JFK. They were forced away. But I'll go into that perhaps if we may another time. So you had the Casablanca Bloc. They were opposed by the Monrovia Group. This is within the Organization of African Unity. It's a very critical and important part of African modern history, of the continent's modern history. And the Monrovia Group, this was headed under Liberia's William Tubman, said, no, we don't need this sudden breakaway from the colonial powers. We need them to help us run our governments. We need them to help us run our new states, our economies. So they pushed for this policy of gradualism, that the colonial powers would stay within advisory roles for the foreseeable future until the countries were on their feet and up and running. Whereas you had the Casablanca Bloc saying, oh no, I'm going to tell you a beautiful story. Okay, this is going to make you happy. This is Nasser. Okay, I adore Gamal Abdel Nasser. I've met Egyptians who don't like him. I just cannot understand that. Do you know his favorite film? Him and his wife, they loved going to the movies on a Saturday afternoon. And do you know what his favorite film was? Maybe you won't guess. It's a Beautiful Life with James Stewart. Do you know that? Do you know that
Yes.
film?
Yeah, It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life. That was his favorite film, and you can see why. That film is so important. It's so critical to everything. It's what the banking industry is supposed to do. Okay.
Yes.
So we're living in Potter's Bar. We're living under that grotesque banker who wants to extort everything, all the money from everyone. So that film is a beautiful example of what we're living under. Anyway, it was Nasser's favorite film, and anyway, so in response to that thought that newly formed African governments are not capable of doing things on their own without the colonial powers advising. So there was the Suez crisis. And cut a long story short, okay? So Egypt nationalized, under Nasser, they nationalized the Suez Canal. So what happened, and that was owned by Britain. So what happened was the company, the Suez company, said, right, okay, well, that's it. We're not helping anymore, and you can run the whole system on your own. And they were like, oh, they'll never manage. They hadn't even have any trained tugboat pilots, because the critical thing is the tugboat pilots who are going to lead the tankers through the canal. This is the most important thing about it. And Nasser said, fine, we'll manage. We know how to do this. So they got this Egyptian trainee tugboat pilot, and the poor guy, okay? And Nasser said to him, now you're going to do this, aren't you? So, no pressure, mate, no pressure. So you had literally the population of Cairo lining the sides of the canal with this trainee tugboat pilot doing his first run.
Yeah.
And they were all watching. And of course, it all went through beautifully. And it was Nasser's way of saying, we are quite capable. We are more than capable. So getting back to what I was saying, okay, so that idea, the Casablanca bloc as opposed to the Monrovia bloc. The Monrovia bloc won out. They won. The OAU lost its shine. That leadership was destroyed. Now we're getting back to what we were supposed to be talking about. So you have that represented in current times under the whole idea of sustainable development. Sustainable development is that policy of gradualism. Don't do anything quickly. The future is uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, therefore don't plan for it. You had a South African economist, government advisor, who actually said that. He said, the future is uncertain, therefore we must not plan for it. Can you imagine?
Wow.
And the government followed his advice.
Wow.
Even more terrifying. So, okay.
One second, PD.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, so there are people like Nkrumah and Nasser who were like, no, we want to make changes and we want to make them fast in order to strengthen our country, our nation, our people.
Industrialize
it. Use credit to grow industry and become self-sufficient and own our resources and manufacture from our resources. And we'll do it quickly. And there were a whole group of other nations that had just been given nominal independence from the British and the French and the Germans and the Portuguese, who said, no, we're going to keep a hold of, we're going to stay connected to our imperial masters. Mm-hmm. So that we can be guided by them and grow slowly. Now, of course, these same imperial masters that had killed millions of African people over hundreds of years, these same imperial masters that had robbed that continent of its wealth and of millions of people and taken them off to be slaves elsewhere. We're going to carry on working with them?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, that's clear. So please carry on.
Well, what you just said, okay, so Dutch East India Company, British East India Company, you have that same mindset, that same corporate mindset, okay? So coming back to Nigeria, Nigeria's primary is oil, right? Oil, what's the full name for Shell? Royal Dutch Shell, owned by the Dutch monarchy. And then you come back to that whole system of the Venetian bankers going to Holland and then going on to Britain. So you can see it all there. But the critical thing to remember is that the Dutch East India Company, British East India Company, it's that corporate mindset, the extraction rather than the enrichment.
The corporate colonial mindset.
Exactly, yeah. So on that subject of getting things done very, very quickly, okay, you come to the resolution of wars, and you will notice that exact same thing. Now, I think it was the first interview I did with you, we talked about Nigeria and Boko Haram, and I explained to you that back in 2015, Boko Haram as a threat were nullified, and that this South African, well, at the time he was the chairman, the South African man by the name of Ibn Barlow, founder of a private military company. He was the chairman of an organization called STEP, a security company. They neutralized the threat of Boko Haram, area the size of Belgium. I went into all of that with you on that first interview. And they did that, cleared an area the size of Belgium within 4 weeks. It's incredible, okay? And Boko Haram at that point were stopped very quickly. Now, I want to come to another example of that, and that is Sierra Leone. So we have the subject of civil war in Sierra Leone, and the exact same thing happened. So you have a system, okay, this UN system. The UN, as far as I can make out, is predominated by the Anglosphere. Okay, I would have said previously the Anglo-American alliance, but now we change our language because of Trump. Okay, so the Anglosphere.
Well, it was set up by the British, by the City of London.
Yes, League of Nations, United Nations.
In order to exert control over how the world manages its affairs.
Quite. So you have their system of control. It's very interesting. I'll go into it another time. But what they do through the United Nations peacekeeping department is very interesting. For example, Central Africa at present, Rwanda is the aggressor in the Democratic Republic of Congo. You have a huge UN peacekeeping mission in place, MONUSCO, who are one of the key players in that Blue Helmets peacekeeping mission, Rwanda. You can't make it up, okay? This has happened.
So Rwandan soldiers are parts of the UN peacekeeping force that's there to prevent Rwanda soldiers attacking Congolese people and territory.
Essentially, yes. And
Right.
this has happened on other occasions. It happened with Somalia and Ethiopia. I'll go into it another time. But so that peacekeeping department is how it actually functions is very interesting in itself. So if I can give you a rundown of what happened in Sierra Leone, and the reason I want to tell you that story is because it's an example of how insurgencies and civil wars can be stopped, and they can be stopped very quickly. How, if anyone dares to come along and stop them, they are then stopped, because the whole idea is to prolong war and destabilization. And I know we've been into that previously, talking about weakened governments, resource extraction, profit margins, blah, blah, blah. So Sierra Leone is another example of diamonds. And I know when I was on with you with Nick Hudson, we were talking about diamonds and resources of South Africa. Okay, so within South Africa is one of the corporations, the key City of London connections is De Beers. De Beers were, up until quite recently, the world's diamond trader. So, okay, so that's changed now because Russia have entered the game and they're producing diamonds industrially anyway. And that whole concept of diamonds being the very, very precious gem that you put on an engagement ring was a marketing trick. So, okay, Sierra Leone. I'm going to come to 1995. So let me just, I want to get your audience's interest here by explaining that the civil war in Sierra Leone came to be known as Tony Blair's Good War.
Ah, Tony Blair, good war. Good man, Tony Blair.
Good man.
He's good at war. Now, Sierra Leone was a former British colony, and it's still a current British colony, but under a different model.
Well, he's still there with the Tony Blair Institute is fully embedded in the government of Sierra Leone.
Doing good work, no doubt.
Absolutely. Teaching them how to run the civil service. That's a fascinating thing, isn't it? It's the apparatus of government, isn't it? The civil service.
Yes.
Of course, he's teaching them how to do it. Anyway, 1995, Sierra Leone. We've got West Africa, Sierra Leone, Liberia. So I look up there because I've got my map up there. You have that whole region, okay, erupting in what became the most brutal war that the continent has ever seen. That civil war in Sierra Leone was the most brutal. By the end of it, a quarter of the population had died. A quarter of the population had died, or just under. That doesn't include the figures for the number of people who had their limbs amputated and their tongues cut out. And it doesn't include the number of girls and women who were violated. So it was the most brutal. So you have a lot happening in Liberia. You've got this man now convicted, the warlord, Charles Taylor. He was an American CIA asset. He goes back to Liberia, is trained by Gaddafi. Gaddafi did not play a good role. People think he's marvelous. He had some amazing policies, we'll go into another time, but he did not always play a good role. He supported Charles Taylor, trained Charles Taylor, and you have what evolves into Charles Taylor really created them, an organization, a rebel movement, an anti-government force called the Revolutionary United Front, the RUF. Did you ever see the film Blood Diamonds? Okay. It's a very popular Hollywood film about the Civil War in Sierra Leone with Leonardo DiCaprio. Anyway, Hollywood made a film to promote and to inject into the public mind all the inaccuracies and the lies of what went on. Very good film for doing that. So you have the RUF who are basically trying to gain control of Sierra Leone. Extremely brutal rebel force. I would go into what they did to people, but I will leave it to your imagination. It's pretty awful stuff.
Yes. And okay. And they were a tool of the imperialists in the city of London.
Well, very directly so, because the links between De Beers, Diamonds, and the rebel forces. You know, there's a book, and I have to get hold of it. It's the fact that they promote in this book, the idea that diamonds have been the currency for all of Africa's wars. You see, diamonds, you could put it in your pocket. It's very easy to, stuff in a diplomatic bag, very easy to transport. So basically, this civil war was over diamonds and the control of the diamonds. And the Revolutionary United Front, 1995, so coming 1995, they have taken a large swathe of the country. You have a military coup, run by the people who are just fed up with the country not running properly. The soldiers haven't been paid. Sierra Leone, under its first leader, Albert Margai, who's a doctor, amazing man, amazing leader. He got done away with. You have a series of very corrupt leaders after that who run the economy right down. Sierra Leone was actually functioning very, very well before then. On a par with Britain in terms of education, infrastructure, so many things. It was actually performing beautifully. And then it got, this is another pattern. People get put in power, they run the economy into the ground. Okay, then you have mass uprising, revolution, and things get destroyed, the state of chaos and destabilization. So the RUF are on the point of taking Freetown, capital of Sierra Leone. And you have the military coup, a young military leader called Valentine Strasser gets into power, or he's made president. Now, there are other interests apart from diamonds. There's a rutile mine. Rutile, a very important mineral for making paint, it has a number of uses. Okay, so you then have Tony Buckingham. People go insane when you say Tony Buckingham because that's Aegis Defence. So I'm not talking about Aegis Defence now, what they're doing now. I'm talking about Tony Buckingham then in those days. Okay, his role was not what they say it was. Anyway, Valentine Strasser, the military president, he hears about the South African PMC called Executive Outcomes. He hears about them, through Tony Buckingham, and he hears about them because of what they've been doing in Angola. Another story, but they did a similar thing in Angola, this PMC called Executive Outcomes, South African PMC. So Valentine Strasser contracts Executive Outcomes to come and secure Freetown from the RUF, like a matter of emergency, because the RUF are just about to overtake Freetown. Tony Buckingham gets the money together because there is no money in the Sierra Leonean treasury. Tony Buckingham gets the money together to pay for EO to come out. To explain to you who Executive Outcomes EO, who they were and how they were formed. So at the end of apartheid, 1994, a lot of the soldiers, black and white, just a white army, black and white guys, colored guys, whatever color you want to call it, were retrenched. A lot of them lost their jobs. And in the new South Africa, that was a very, very difficult situation to be in. And so this South African man, actually Zambian-born, guy called Eben Barlow, he formed actually it's like the forerunner of the PMC, okay? Mm-hmm. So he formed the company and he employed the best of the best. Of all the guys who are finding themselves retrenched, no hope, no job in the new South Africa for the white ones. Also for a lot of the Umkhonto weSizwe fighters, they found themselves in the same position. Umkhonto weSizwe, armed wing of the ANC. So this company forms, and they are an amalgamation of some of the most incredibly well-trained soldiers, because the South African Defence Force were incredibly good, incredibly advanced. And what they had been doing was guerrilla warfare. They'd been fighting in the bush of Angola, in Mozambique, all around, so they knew exactly that kind of terrain, the guerrilla warfare style of fighting. So they get contracted to buy the Valentine Strasser of the Sierra Leonean military government. They go up there. They have about 100 men at tops. Okay, bear this in mind. And I'll tell you why you should bear it in mind, okay? So you've got about less than 100 highly trained, highly committed EO guys. What transpires later is the UN with 17,000 blue berets fail to do. They prolong. What happens in the end, okay, of this story is the UN under the aegis of Britain prolong the war that Executive Outcomes actually manages to stop with less than 100 men.
And how large was the force that they were up against?
The RUF, they were at that time at the start, about 15,000. Wow. Remember, they're being pushed in from Liberia.
Right.
So you've got Charles Taylor, who's actually coordinating it. Right. But the Sierra Leonean head of RUF on the ground is a man called Foda Sanko.
So what happened with Executive Outcome then, when they're 100 against 15,000?
Okay, so what they did was they trained the Sierra Leonean army. Okay, they trained them. They were previously very badly trained. That is another pattern, another tactic of that has been in place. That's changing now, of keeping African militaries trained in the wrong way and severely under-equipped, so that they cannot counter insurgencies and they cannot encounter anti-government forces. That is a real thing that's happened. Okay, so EO come in, very few men on the ground. They work with the army, the Sierra Leonean army, and they wear the uniforms. Okay, they amalgamate into them, and they only have at their disposal the equipment that is available to that army, which is virtually nothing. So lies have been told. This Wikipedia page changed quite recently because the lies that were said about this organization are just phenomenal. The ANC, South African government, under the ANC, threatened to arrest all of the EO guys when they went back to South Africa for being mercenaries. So the scale of the lies told about them, the disinformation, is phenomenal, an absolute onslaught. Why? Because they managed to stop the RUF. It took them just under a year. I want to give you one example, okay? I've read a number of books on this, so there are many resources people can go to. There's the books by Ibn Bala himself, Executive Outcomes Against All Odds. Thoroughly recommend that book. A later one, War for Africa. And then one of the other members of EO who were on the ground, Colonel Rolf van Heerden, he's written a book called Four Bull, One Tracer. He was the man in charge of the EO forces on the day. And he worked with a group called the Kamajors. Now, I bring in the Kamajors. I wish you'd seen that film, Blood Diamonds, because in the film, okay, that Hollywood film, they portray the Kamajors as rural fools. They portray them in a very poor light. Now, in actual fact, Rolf van Heerden and the EO guys worked with the Kamajors. The Kamajors are the hunters, the healers, the herbal guys, the protectors of the rural communities. Very, very important role. I wanted to bring them in because you have an equivalent currently in the Democratic Republic of Congo called the Wazalendo. The Wazalendo are the exact same group of people. They are members of the community who come out to protect, they're just tired of their women and children being raped. They're tired of their communities being attacked, and they take up arms and start fighting. So I want to come back to the Kamajors because the Kamajors had an extremely good and beneficial role. They worked with Executive Outcomes. They did the tracking to find out the RUF bases. They protected the communities. And do you know, at the end of the war, when they had the Sierra Leone Truth and Reconciliation trials, the very first man that they tried at that bloody kangaroo court was the head of the Kamajors,
right.
A man called Sam Hinger Norman, and he was the very first person that they tried. And I know they are going to try and do this again with the Wazalendo and ODYSEE because this is what they do.
Okay, but we're going to stay with Sierra Leone.
Yes, sorry.
Right?
Yeah, okay.
So
the
EO, they rout the RFU.
The RUF,
right? So they're defeated. So then now what happens in Sierra Leone?
You have the government put under extreme pressure, really intimidation by IMF, by Britain to stop the contract, to cancel the contract for Executive Outcomes. Executive Outcomes are then told, no, you have to leave. Right. Now, there's one guy, and I have to tell you the story, okay, super quick. There's this one guy called Neil Ellis. He was the pilot of the attack helicopter. They only had one attack helicopter at their disposal. Now, Neil Ellis said after EO were told to leave the country, he said, I'm not going. I'm not leaving. Nobody else here can fly the attack helicopter. I'm going to stay. So that man stayed without pay for a year, sleeping under his helicopter. He saw it as his helicopter. It was a helicopter on loan from Russia. And he kept the RUF. He more or less single-handedly, kept the RUF from invading Freetown again. So, these guys are real heroes. Very, very brave indeed. He got no pay for that at all. And I saw in a clip in an interview with him, and somebody said, why did you do this? Why did you stay on for 12 months without pay, flying the attack helicopter every day, going out doing sorties, looking for the RUF bases in the jungle canopy. And he said, because I like these people.
Yes, and then at some point, Tony Blair comes along. But
and Tony Blair comes along.
When does that happen? How does that happen?
So they get their contracts cancelled. Okay, so what transpires is you have a very interesting thing. Okay, now the RUF were interviewed. One of their top guys, a guy called Mike Lemon, was interviewed by a Dutch journalist called Linda Polman. She asked, why were they so brutal? And the commander of the RUF said, we were getting the world's attention. We were driving up the price of peace. So they escalated the amputations and the rapings and everything else they did, a lot of cannibalism. Boy, if I could just get into some of the stuff that went on, okay? Mm-hmm. They escalated it to get the world's attention. And Linda Polman, very good journalist, she explains this as driving up the price of peace. Now tell me that isn't what Israel has done.
Yes, absolutely.
Isn't it exactly what Israel have done? Okay, so getting back to the situation, the propaganda that involved in that whole story. French journalist called Philippe Diaz produced this documentary called Empire in Africa, the most shocking example of propaganda, where he propagandizes the RUF and calls them the freedom fighters. Okay, these are the cannibalist, women and child violating freedom fighters who are there to claim the riches of the land for the people. Mm-hmm. So this whole program is run where you have insurgencies who are promoted by the media, the liberal media, who are legitimized, the key word, they are legitimized by the media, given basis and grounds for what they are doing. So this documentary, absolutely awful what they did, legitimized the role of the RUF. Okay, so what I'm trying to explain to you with this thing of gradualism, right? You have the insurgency stopped. You then have the UN, primarily under Britain, because Sierra Leone is British colony, come in. The war it continues, okay? It continues and doesn't end finally until 2002. So you have this policy of perpetuating war. At the same time, you have this policy of getting anti-government forces, rebels, terrorists, whatever, into government, which is exactly what the UN did with the RUF under Britain. Okay, they said no, you have to negotiate with these rebel forces, and you have to get them representation in government because that is a part of the democratic process. Can you imagine trying to get people who do that to the population seats in government? Can you imagine even considering it? So that is the policy. Now, Sierra Leone is in not a good way at all. The economy is in a really bad shape. You ask yourself, what was the whole purpose? The whole purpose of that, well, De Beers and the diamond traders profited absolutely wonderfully, for the diamond trade, the illegal diamond trade, the smuggling that went on. But you also have impact on the national psyche. So you have a population who are absolutely traumatized by what has happened to them. Now, you are never going to get a situation where somebody in Sierra Leone says, we need a revolution, guys. This country is just not operating. Look, all our minerals are flying out the window. And we have all this poverty. We are living in such poverty. You will not have that situation arise because you have such an impact on the national psyche. The trauma is horrendous. And it's all part of why things are done, why that is conducted.
So then where does Tony Blair come into all of this?
Oh, because he was Britain's Prime Minister at the time. Okay.
What was his role?
I don't think I mentioned that Tony Blair Institute used to be called African Governance Initiative, AGI.
Right.
So on the resolution of conflict, the 17,000 UN peacekeepers who couldn't control the situation, who prolonged the war which had been stopped. The RUF had been stopped. The new government formed. First thing that happens is that the economy is liberalized. Okay?
Right.
And who should move into headquarters, government headquarters, and occupy exactly the same building? African Governance Initiative, the first name for Tony Blair Institute, and the Adam Smith Institute. Okay, Adam Smith, free market. And there you have it. So you have almost a coup happening.
Right. A soft coup.
A soft coup happening. Yeah.
Right. Which is the British model, the City of London, because they never had many hundreds of years ago, but mostly recent history, Britain doesn't have the manpower or the military muscle of, say, the United States or Russia or China to be able to exert direct control. So it uses manipulative machinations in the form of soft coups in order to exert control. And it does it through proxies. And so I imagine, would I be right in assuming that the City of London, in some way through its proxies, funded the RUF, which was, I suppose, supported by De Beers as well?
You can't say that so much, but it's the interlinking, because this whole system is interlinked. It's a network.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah. And then now we have Tony Blair and his institute and the Adam Smith Institute embedded within the Sierra Leone polity. And that would prevent the rise of a nationalist sovereigntist in the form of Ibrahim Traore, who wants to bring about the American system of political economy in Sierra Leone so that people could benefit from the incredible riches that are in Sierra Leone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you. Thank you, PD. I'll have the links where people can find you on your Substack, your X, and also please donate to it via Ko-fi.com. I'll have that link in the description below. And please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, help my channel grow. Thank you very much for doing that. All the best. Bye-bye.